Welcome to this webinar. It's 7 months left until DORA enters into full force, and I just wanted to have a chat with Björn Wendleby and his colleague Rickard Engblom about the status of the preparations for DORA. So welcome Björn and Rickard to this webinar. It's not meant as a presentation of the rules in DORA, it's more from a concrete point of view, because Björn and Rickard, they are a lawyer and legal counsel at Harvest Law Firm in Stockholm. So they do a lot of gap analysis of the preparations for DORA for different types of financial institutes. So I will jump right at it and just throw out a question to you. What are the most common gaps that you have seen when you have provided gap analysis of the preparations for DORA? And how does it differ from the implementation of other challenging regulations?
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting us. Just to kick things off, then I think that this is an extremely detailed regulation and also lots of detailed delegated acts. So of course the level of detail is definitely something that we have looked into in the projects.
Yeah, and adding to that point, as Björn just mentioned, given that you have this main framework being DORA and all the additional technical standards, we're talking about both regulatory technical standards as well as implementing technical standards. I think key here is also to get an overview of the framework as such. I mean, you do have a lot of different acts that you need to analyze. So having just a holistic view here, I think is one way to start off this a gap project with. I have seen examples where some companies might just have done a gap analysis towards the main regulation, which in our opinion would not be sufficient. DORA, looking at only the DORA regulation as such, it's more of a principle-based regulation, whereas all the details are more set in the technical standards being issued in a later stage, basically. I've also seen examples where companies have done their gap analysis towards only specific articles in the frameworks, which obviously is not sufficient either. So just as Björn mentioned, you need to take a full picture of the regulation as such when you start off with such a project.
Yeah, and before this webinar, we spoke about the people who should be involved in the working group in order to have the right competence to make sure that you implement this regulation in the right way. And what's your take on that? What have you seen? Have they been able to set up the right team, or have you seen any deficiencies in that area?
It varies a lot. I think to kick things off there as well, I mean, this is not a compliance project. This is mainly a risk management project and also concerns a lot of the risks involved in day-to-day business. So you should absolutely bring in the risk managers. You should have the guys that are responsible for the IT systems, that knows the systems, and then introduce them and to the DORA regulation and all the details to get them to understand the magnitude. So, and the problem what we have seen is that you don't bring in the right people from the beginning.
And what kind of problems have you then seen? What have they missed, if you are more concrete?
The right IT guy doesn't come along until 3 months later, and he or she immediately understands that there are lots of systems that needs to be analyzed that no one did know about from the beginning. So you have to start over again. And I think another problem is sometimes you don't get the board involved. You must get the board involved at an early stage to get them to understand how big this project actually is and the impact it has on the organization.
And when talking about the board, do you believe that a completely new competence is needed in the boardroom, and the board is responsible for defining the risk appetite when it comes to digital risks? I mean, what level of competence do you need in the boardroom, and do you think that the majority of boards have that?
How honest should we be? No, but I think,
Yeah.
I mean, what we've seen, there's definitely a lack of competence in some boardrooms, that's for sure. But it is a complicated sort of new rule system that is coming along. But if you have a sort of long experience as a board member, then you're used in taking care of big projects and to get reports, etc., and also to bring in experienced consultants or other teams to assist. Maybe you want to add something there, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, you also obviously need to put that in perspective in terms of how large is the company, how technically involved is the company, what type of products are you offering towards end customers, and also how dependent are you on different technical services supporting your own services towards the end customers. I mean, if you are a smaller company, not very technical heavy, if you will, obviously you will not really demand the same type of competence in the board as you might have would in a larger company. That being said, I think it's also one way to approach the right competence in the board is also conducting the necessary training programs for the board members, educating them. I mean, everybody can learn about ICT risks one way and another. So you don't have to be an expert from the get-go. You can definitely learn and become better in this type of area as well.
I completely agree, and especially, I mean, there are so many areas in which the board needs to raise the competence. I mean, you have the ESG requirements as well, so I definitely think that this piece of regulation requires better training all over the company, including the board. But Rikard, we also spoke before the webinar about when the board is defining the risk appetite for digital risks. And I mean, we've been used to defining the risk appetite since before when it comes to operational risks. But what's new there? And do you see any challenges for the board to define the risk appetite according to DORA?
I would say that it's nothing new looking on how the different policymakers have thought of making or setting the right risk appetites towards ICT risks. What's new, though, if you compare it to the current frameworks that many of the financial entities have to apply or comply with, the difference here is being that DORA is very strict on the fact that you take into account both quantitative and also qualitative measures when setting the right risk appetite in the company. And there's a very good rationale why you need to do this, because the main reason here is basically that the company or the risk managers within the company needs to understand what the risk appetite is. How can they measure this? How can they set up the right safety measures in order to make sure that they are within the risk appetite being set by the board? Therefore, it's very important to have a good structured way in setting a good risk appetite. Historically, we have seen, if you look at operational risk, for instance, we have seen that many of the financial entities have somewhat assess their risk appetites in monetary terms, for instance. And that is typically something that is very hard to work after. So in that sense, I think it's much more important to work with qualitative measures because then the company or the personnel within the company knows what measures that needs to be taken. And just to put an example, if you have a very important IT system, obviously you can only accept a certain time of downtime, for instance, for that specific program. In that way, you can put the risk appetites, and instead of doing that in monetary terms, you do that in downtime. So how many minutes or hours, for instance, would a company be able to be exposed for that type of incident? Just like.
But that's interesting. And also one thing that we touched upon before this webinar was the general understanding of your infrastructure and what is every supplier doing and how is it connected to another tool. Can you mention any challenges related to the definition of ICT suppliers and whether they are critical or not? Because I've noted that that has been a bit of a challenge before they can start to understand how they should do due diligence on them and how deep they should go.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem, but I think it also boils down to that you need to find the right persons in the organization that can assist you with those matters. And then the IT guys must be there, the guys that knows the systems, that knows the links, etc. And it can be very different if you're a big bank or if you're a small mutual fund company when it comes to matters like this. But typically these days, instead of just getting stuck, we sort of recommend people to list the different systems, to bring them into this rather detailed scheme that you have to fill in about each system. And then the next step to determine whether actually the system is a crucial system, maybe that involves other persons as well, just to identify the systems, what they are linked to, and also bringing people can assist you with the next step. Is this a crucial system? Anything more I should say there, Richard?
Not really. I totally agree with that approach. I think it's definitely the best approach to have that documented. But just as Linda mentioned, we do know a lot of companies struggle with the definitions within DORA. The terminology as such is sometimes kind of hard to grasp, and I think key here is also to kind of decide on how you interpret the different definitions and work from that. And if you look at ICT assets or ICT information or ICT services, for that sake, I think instead of just looking at the definition within DORA, you should probably also analyze it in relation to what type of ICT risk is at hand here. If you can identify a ICT risk, then you probably are doing with an ICT service as such. And then from there, you obviously go to the second step where you determine whether or not it supports critical or important functions within the company. That's one approach as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting what you say. I mean, we've had a ton of challenging regulations before. So, I mean, when we don't have the exact details in the regulations, we just have to decide how we interpret it to the best of our knowledge, document that, and then wait for possible criticism and improve. So I really like that approach. And another area that we have thought about is I mean, GRC Watch, we are a SaaS provider, so we are a provider of these kind of services. And we have started to get many suggestions for amendments of agreements so that the financial institutes can secure that they have the right clauses in the agreement, etc. And I think at least that's what I'm trying to do on my end. How can we reduce work for parties on both sides? Because in some way, we on the supplier side, we could pick the standard clauses, sign off on an agreement and send it to our customers and speed up this process and help the customers. But I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts about this and the requirements in DORA, because it is a true headache getting these things in place before DORA enters into force.
Yeah, I think that to some extent one can argue that some institutions have started too early with this work. Actually, of course, they're afraid that the deadline is closing it's only it's January next year. But I think in practice, I mean, the biggest suppliers together with the biggest institutions, they will negotiate. There are standard clauses. Maybe they can set a standard after a while, hopefully, because it makes no sense that all small and mid-sized firms should actually sit there and have tons of law fees on their table. It's good for us, but not for them. So this is something that should be standardized, and I think that you actually have a good part to play in that. That would really be helpful for firms as well, that to get this standardized, as it is in almost every other area that's been around for some time. People sort of get together after a while. These are the clauses that we should have. And here there are a lot of clauses already in the regulations that you should actually have in your agreements. So, but I think focus should be definitely to be doing the gap analysis, to think about your systems, how you should fix the testing. And of course, you have these agreements that you need to fix them, but get the other stuff on the table to try to fix them first. And maybe you can, let them hold, so stay away for some time anyway, before they come and sign an agreement. But you had an example that someone wanted you to sign an agreement that if you do anything wrong, you can be thrown out. That was rather fantastic to hear that the law firm has proposed such a clause.
No, but I think, I mean, you can comply with regulation in 1,000 different ways. And I think that one type of clause that I have seen in this type of amendments is if you are not compliant with DORA and maybe also ESG requirements, etc., then we need to terminate the agreement immediately. And I think, I mean, we need to find a wording which is practical for both parties, because it's not going to be a stable environment for the suppliers if anyone can just come any day and say you are not compliant, and then they can terminate the agreement. I mean, there has to be like a solid cause for that and a discussion. But I think we will solve that. The conclusion is maybe that it's not. There are other parts which are more urgent, maybe at this stage. But what else did we talk about? I mean, the whole idea with this discussion was just to throw up, are they focusing on the right things? Have you seen any particular problems? But do you have any tips to the working groups that you, I mean, which are the key tips that you give after gap analysis?
Now, I think that one thing that we hear all the time is like, oh, but we want to apply this proportionality principle. So we will use that principle. Yeah, sure, but you must do your gap analysis first and do it in the right way. So you have all the systems identified, etc. Then you may start to use this principle in a sensible way if you're a small company, mid-sized company. You become a little bit of a therapist as well when you talk to firms. You have had that discussion on a number of times. I know that, Richard.
Yeah. And obviously, when you talk about different hurdles to become compliant with DORA, I think one thing is also the timeline towards when it's supposed to take effect. We have 6 months from now on. I know for a fact that a lot of financial entities is waiting until summer ends before they might start looking at this piece of legislation. And I think do not underestimate how much time that you need to put in place to get everything right. And although you might not be 100% compliant when the legislation enters into force, I think you should definitely at least have a priority list to work after or on before we reach that date.
And also don't get paralyzed if you see that you have a number of gaps or lack of resources. Just try to sort out what you actually definitely need to do first. And that also, when it comes to questions about details in the legislation, how should we interpret this rule? It's so important not to get stuck there. You need, as you said, Linda, you need to come to a conclusion on how to handle this. And maybe you have to go back later on and rethink this, but you can't let it stop you, because then you lose so much time, and you also increase the risk if you don't do stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree. And my final question was just was actually going to be, are we stressing too much about DORA? I mean, we have been implementing challenging regulations before, but I think it's the first time I've seen that some working groups are more stuck than before. Maybe because they are afraid of doing something wrong or to make the wrong decisions. But it's better to do and execute and then rethink and do it all over again. But thanks a lot for this chat. Do you have any final comments, or should we wrap up with this? Yeah.
No, well, just best of luck to all you people out there that are working with this.
Yeah, and if you need help, you can call Björn and Rickard. Yeah, but thanks for joining. I wish you all a real good summer, and don't hesitate to contact us. I mean, Björn and Rickard, they are experts on analyzing the rules in DORA. I'm working with ICT due diligence at GRC Watch, and we are also working on a solution for Register of Information. So just get in touch with me if you want to speak about that. But thanks for joining.